advanced missile defenses. But the Chinese, as you know, say they are anti-nuclear. They want to get rid of the world of nuclear weapons and are opposed to nuclear proliferation. One PLA general told Danny Stillman, a top official at Los Alamos, quote, "China will never proliferate nuclear technology." As Tom Reed, co-author with Danny Stillman of this book, The Nuclear Express, which I recommend to all of you, writes, "That is utter bunk." In 1982, the Chinese leadership made the conscious decision to support the proliferation of nuclear weapons technology into the third world. Let me just give you 2 paragraphs from the book. Quote, "Since 1991, China has shipped uranium to Iran, helped with mining at Saqqad, instructed Iran on the construction of the conversion facility at Isfahan, and of the MS enrichment facility at Karaj, as well as the transfer of missile technology. China uses North Korea as a retransfer point for the sale of missile and nuclear technology to Iran, Pakistan, Yemen, and Libya, overseeing the North Korea-Pakistani trade of missiles for nuclear equipment while working very closely with North Korean military officers," end quote. Now, China does artfully camouflage its proliferation activities. It innocently claims it has no influence over the behavior of the North Korean regime. It urges the United States and its allies to engage in peaceful diplomacy, avoid any deployment of greater military power, resolve all issues through negotiations. Now, we've accepted this Chinese appeasement of North Korean rogue behavior, and it's tied the hands of one successive administration after another. We have failed to confront China for its own proliferation activities, as well as consistently we try to avoid antagonizing the poor dear Chinese by not strengthening over our own rock defenses or our own defenses. In short, we end up apologizing for trying to defend ourselves. Now, this suits China just fine. While the conventional wisdom believes China has an interest in controlling North Korea's growing military capability, I don't believe that is true. Far from seeking stability in the region, China encourages North Korea's belligerence as a lever to remove U.S. military power from the region, and that includes missile defenses, our U.S. Navy, and our troop deployments, all of which China encourages over and over again to lessen, deploy less of, or just simply remove. Already, Cato's Doug Bandow on the far right is calling for the United States to leave the Korean Peninsula, as is Larry Korb of the Center for American Progress on the far left. Thus, there is a strong geostrategic connection between North Korea's testing of nuclear weapons and long-range ballistic missiles, and China's growing push to control the vast oil and gas resources in the South China Sea, and by doing so, pushing the United States out. For China to exercise hegemony over the area, they want U.S. military capabilities in the region eventually withdrawn. They believe that North Korean missile and nuclear threats are assumed to hasten that day. I'll give you an example. After the December 2012 and February 2013 missile and nuclear tests by North Korea, in a meeting with the Secretary of State, the Chinese leadership, right on cue, complained that U.S. military deployments in the region were being unduly provocative. Now get this, North Korea launches ballistic missiles, tests nuclear weapons, and it's we, the United States, are quote-unquote unduly provocative. China then went on further, claimed that they couldn't rein in North Korea's behavior, explaining they didn't have any influence over the regime. And in the clincher, they told our Secretary of State that the United States should, quote, pull back its missile defense deployments and, quote, lessen its troop deployments in the Western Pacific. The peace talks, of course, are a distraction. While urging negotiations, China has made very assertive claims over the oil resources of the South China Sea, some 1,200 miles beyond its southernmost area, the island of Hainan. If North Korea threatens the U.S. with nuclear or missile, the logical U.S. policy should be to defend itself. Peace talks with North Korea would seem to be beside the point. Thus it is, to avoid taking action, we end up underestimating and downplaying North Korea's capability to launch both ballistic missiles and arm them with nuclear warheads. After all, the reasoning goes, we can't really have peace talks if the North Koreans keep developing better and better weapons. Naturally, the top question should be, what will Pyongyang do with such capability? In 2013, the conventional wisdom that the North Korean leadership was engaging in just bluster. One reporter called it sound and fury signifying little of practical threat to the United States. In fact, that was followed up by media surveys of opinions in Seoul, the capital of the Republic of Korea, emphasizing the relative calm among its people. Now, even though the U.S. government and its allies are now taking the North Korean threats more seriously, given the January ballistic missile tests and the nuclear weapons test, Pyongyang, there's still much missing in the analysis of the import of Pyongyang's military capabilities. Let me give you an example. On the late 2012 and early 2013 missile and nuclear tests, Walter Pincus of the Washington Post blamed, quote, a bellicose United States, end of quote, for the North Korean actions. Get this, Pincus claimed that the U.S. deployment of tactical nuclear weapons on the Korean Peninsula after the Korean War led Pyongyang to respond by building its own nuclear capability some 45 years later, when in fact 15 years prior to the North Korean exploding a nuclear weapon, the United States had withdrawn all its nuclear weapons from the peninsula. Similarly, the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace published a book or study called Do Unto Them, kind of a religious reference, a study of nuclear proliferation in which they said that North Korea and Iran sought nuclear weapons because the U.S. threatens them. Carnegie said that after all, the United States had talked about regime change, and we have not pledged never to use nuclear weapons first. Now, this tendency to always blame America stems from a foolish hope that with just a change in U.S. policy, the regime actions of Iran and North Korea will change accordingly. Pyongyang and Iran play on this theme incessantly, always claiming its missiles or its nuclear program or other military action as a result in response to a U.S. hostile policy. And because such a hostile policy is the eye of the beholder, North Korea or Iran get to define what it is, and thus whatever they find objectionable is immediately cited by American disarmament enthusiasts as proof positive it is a largely bad U.S. policy that drives North Korean missile and nuclear threats. This is complemented by a parallel analysis that explains away threatening North Korean military capabilities as, quote, not too serious, usually defined as not requiring more U.S. defense deployments or a change in current, quote-unquote, conventional wisdom. This has been going on for decades for our other adversaries too. Remember, in the early 1980s, Secretary of Defense Weinberger published what was called Soviet Military Power, an annual compilation of Moscow's military capabilities. The New York Times described the 1980 assessment on April 20th, 1987 as a cartoon, and then later conceded that the document, quote, made a powerful case for balancing Soviet military power when at the end of the Cold War it was revealed that the 1987 assessment actually underestimated Soviet military power. But the effort to downplay our adversaries' military power, including Pyongyang, misses something very important. Instead of examining the strategic objectives of the regime, which could in all likelihood include the delivering of a surreptitious EMP attack against the United States, many pundits continue to claim that the North Koreans don't have sufficient or fully tested or demonstrated capability. I once quipped at a lecture I was giving at the Naval Academy that the only time these people will be happy and be convinced that the North Koreans have demonstrated a capability will be when they explode a nuclear weapon off a missile on the East River in Manhattan. Now, over the last 15 years, if you go through the history, critics have argued that North Korea could not build staged rockets. They can. They couldn't build solid fuel capable missiles. They can. Or have a satellite launch capability. They do. For example, in May 2010, one prominent critic published an East-West Institute report, for example, that said Iran had no demonstrated capability to launch staged rockets or had missiles with solid fuel. These are very important technologies. Solid fuel enables you to launch a ballistic missile with very little notice. Staging means you can launch a rocket further than the Scud limit of about 2,000 kilometers. In fact, the East-West Institute couldn't have gotten it more wrong. And literally just 2 days later, Iran launched a rocket that, quote, successfully demonstrated a staging capability on top of being a solid fuel capable rocket. Now, the reaction to the most recent North Korean nuclear tests and missile launches has followed very much the same pattern. We are told the rockets could not reach all of the continental United States, relax everyone, but they could reach Hawaii or Guam or maybe the Republic of Korea and Japan, but who cares? Then the reports would dismiss even those threats, arguing, yes, the rockets could reach their targets, but they were not very accurate. Just to remind you folks, an EMP explosion 70 kilometers above the Earth's surface need only take place somewhere in the atmosphere over the eastern United States, between Boston and Atlanta, and the eastern seaboard and Memphis. Accuracy is not their worry. On top of which, many analysts have concluded that North Korea has not mastered the technology to make a nuclear device. except in wisdom, was blown out of the water in 2013 when Congressman Doug Lamborn, a member of the House Armed Services Committee, founding member of the Congressional Missile Defense and EMP Caucus, cited an unpublished DIA report that concluded that North Korea had indeed mastered the technology of smaller nuclear weapons and could launch such a device on its rockets. Now, this was followed by a series of walkbacks by the administration as the United States public was reassured that the DIA report was a minority view within the intelligence community, that such a capability had neither been demonstrated, that word again, or fully tested. Now, that underestimation continues today. In the aftermath of North Korea's nuclear test on January 6th and its subsequent missile test, television press reporters were quick to reassure the American people that North Korea had not miniaturized a nuclear warhead for delivery by a missile. Notice, that's different than not having a warhead that can fit on a missile. Now it was a question it wasn't miniaturized. This commonplace assertion that North Korea does not have a nuclear armed missile is untrue. Let's look at the record. 8 years ago, the CIA's top East Asian analyst stated publicly that North Korea had miniaturized nuclear weapons successfully for delivery on its no-dome, medium-range ballistic missiles capable of striking South Korea, Japan, or the United States if launched off a freighter, for example. We now know North Korea can both attach a nuclear warhead to some of its growing arsenal of ballistic missiles and reach Hawaii, Alaska, and our allies in East Asia, and at least since 2012, the western portion of the continental United States. In 2009, European intelligence agencies at NATO headquarters told the press publicly that North Korea's no-dome missiles are armed with nuclear warheads. In 2011, the director of the Defense Intelligence Agency, Lieutenant General Roger Burgess, testified before the Senate Armed Services Committee that North Korea has, quote, weaponized its nuclear device into warheads for arming ballistic missiles. And then in February and March 2015, 8 former senior security officials of the Reagan and Clinton administration warned that North Korea and Iran should be regarded as capable of delivering by satellite a small nuclear warhead to make an EMP attack against the United States. These people were including President Reagan's science advisor, the administrator of NASA, the chairman of the Congressional EMP Commission, the director of Central Intelligence, the director of the Strategic Defense Initiative, former chairman of the National Intelligence Council, and so forth. And on April 7th, just a few weeks later, 2015, at a Pentagon press conference, Admiral William Courtney, the commander of North American Airspace, responsible for protecting the U.S. from long-range missiles, warned that the intelligence community assessed that North Korea's KN-08 mobile ICBM can strike the United States with a nuclear warhead. A few months later, the commander of NORAD again warned the Atlantic Council, quote, I agree with the intelligence community that we assess that the North Koreans have the ability, they have the weapons, and they have the ability to miniaturize those weapons, and they have the ability to put them in a rocket that can range the U.S. homeland. Now, on January 6, 2016, North Korea announced they conducted a nuclear test of an H-bomb. And on February 7, 2016, they launched a mock satellite. Again, the instant experts and the drive-by media rushed forward to deny that North Korea had an H-bomb or that their missiles could reach America. Much of the reaction of the experts was that the North Korean nuclear test was along the lines of what one BBC report, quoting an Andrea Berger from the Royal United States Services Institute in London, who assured us that North Korea, quote, only wants a peace treaty with the U.S. and seems to believe that it will not be taken seriously until it can enter talks on this issue with sizable military strength, end of quote. Again, it's our fault. The New York Times echoed this analysis, claiming, although North Korea can learn much about the technology to build ballistic missiles from satellite launches, putting a satellite into orbit does not guarantee an ability to deliver a nuclear warhead on an intercontinental ballistic missile. True, but one leads to the other with respect to the propulsion and guidance systems. Now, the Times went even further. It said, well, don't worry, North Korea has never tested a ballistic missile version of its Unha series rockets. And after 4 nuclear tests by the North, it claimed that Western analysts, not quite sure who they are, were still unsure whether the country had mastered the technology to build a warhead small enough to mount on a long-range missile. That only tells you that the New York Times doesn't read the intelligence reports that are in its own newspaper. And then it said the warhead could not survive the intense heat while re-entering the atmosphere as well as a guidance system capable of delivering a warhead close to its target. Again, an EMP attack with a warhead exploded at 70 kilometers above the Earth's surface doesn't have to re-enter the atmosphere, so it doesn't need any heat shielding. Second, it doesn't really care whether it's close to its target because it's talking about exploding a nuclear warhead over a couple million square miles of territory. Now, on January 6th, as I pointed out, North Korea tests what it claims to be a hydrogen bomb. I think most of the analysis has got it wrong. Peter Pry, my colleague, and Henry Sokolsky of the National Proliferation Education Center, I think got it right. First, they pointed out our intelligence on North Korea is far from perfect. The test, they said, could very well have been what is known as a boosted fission weapon, which my friend Tom Reed, former Deputy National Security Advisor to President Reagan and Secretary of the Air Force, said just the other day he thought it was. Remember, the U.S. and intelligence services have not detected uranium or plutonium, both A-bomb fuels, in any of the North Korean tests, but have detected tritium, which is an H-bomb fuel. A boosted weapon could explain this anomaly. What Henry Sokolsky notes is that North Korea may be getting help from Russia or China, a possibility that a former CIA report of 1995 completely neglected to take into account. If true, it changes the framework of how we in the U.S. approach and deal with proliferation problems. If North Korea and Iran are in fact getting help from Russia or China, which the retired U.S. North Command Commander General Charles Jacoby agrees they are, and they don't have to rely only on their indigenous capabilities, their nuclear and missile programs at any time could very well be much more advanced than is commonly thought, as well as the possibility that such advanced technology could be sold to other rogue regimes such as Iran or Pakistan, Lebanon, Yemen, or Libya, as they have been done in the past. In fact, North Korea could very well have conducted what is called a decoupled nuclear test. This is where the nuclear explosion is in a large cavern filled with shock-absorbing materials. It reduces the seismic signal and conceals the true yield of the test.